Max Eastman, what made him do it? Well, a lot of the horrors coming out of the Soviet Union that a lot of the left refused to acknowledge, not just the communist left, but even a lot of the liberal left that just didn't want to deal with it. I see that on the Supreme Court. Almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody who went on to the Supreme Court, very conservative, has moved to the left over the years. The Brennan was a Republican appointee under Eisenhower. The Sandra Day O'Connor, Blackmun, was a Nixon appointee who was reversing himself, became an opponent of the death penalty after a while, was the last one who was absolutely against the death penalty. There's a tendency, and my theory is that they once they're there, they don't owe anything to anybody at that point. There's nobody who can get them removed except for by an impeachment process. That's, as we know, doesn't really happen. And so they're in for life. And so they're there day after day being affected by smart people every day who are making all kinds of arguments and talking to them about all kinds of things. And sometimes when people get older, they chill out a little bit. We'll see if the current crowd does.
Do you anticipate that happening?
Maybe with a couple of them, I mean, Roberts, is, an interesting guy. And I think he's like, man, look what's happening. He's like one of the old style, moderate Republicans that are on there. But when you're in a religion like Amy Coney Barrett is, I don't know. I don't know how much it governs what she does. Maybe not. She sounds okay when she's talking, right? She doesn't want it to be that way. I just don't know. Kavanaugh, I mean, I just have no idea. He obviously is a very angry person. I mean, he was accused either falsely or truthfully. I don't know. I found her credible, but I don't know, but he was all real angry at that and seems to have a chip on his shoulder about it. The other two, I just, and, so some of them never do change. They are just locked in and they've got their ideology and that's what they have. But Sandra Day O'Connor, she was a Reagan appointee, and by the time she was off the court, she was, considered a raging liberal in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't think, and I'm
Yeah.
too young to really have a formed opinion on this, but I don't think that the party lines were quite as rigid.
They weren't.
Yeah,
They weren't.
that seems to be my understanding.
In fact, if you look at the debate between Bush and Reagan back in 1980 when they were running against each other before they became running mates, which everybody looked at that and said, "How's that going to happen?" But it happened. What they say about immigration, you would think that they were like in the left wing of the Democratic Party today. That's evolved. That whole concept. Now, granted, immigration has increased a lot more since then, but they all talked about at least in much more humane terms than that were discussed. There's a video of it on YouTube. You can find it. I mean, they're like talking like somebody in the sanctuary movement would talk practically. It's wild. But that doesn't mean he was any less liberal. In 1960, Reagan had a speech you can also find on YouTube calling Medicare socialism. So, he went from being a liberal to conservative to mellowing out again. Sometimes you go back and forth a little.
What do you think causes that?
It's just,
Just experience
I think
with
there's
age?
different things. I think you've got you've got different things. As I've noticed, it depends on what you're into. Soldiers tend to move to the left, especially as they get older. Officers do. Admiral LaRocque became a pinnacle of the peace movement. McNamara, who was basically the architect of the Vietnam War, was an advocate for nuclear freeze for and the rest. Country singers, when they get older, tend to move to the left. The whole what do you call it? What was the crowd that had Johnny Cash and Were they the Highwaymen? I can't remember, but it was anyway. It had Chris Christopherson, Johnny Cash. It was sort of like the super team of the country stars. All of them are basically left wing. Willie Nelson, and I'm forgetting who the fourth was, but and priests. They're young, they're kind of intense. They get older, they mellow out. But then you get pundits like Chris Hitchens, brilliant guy, and I loved listening to him right and left. And he'll tell you he never really went right. He'll tell you he just was smarter about it, but he didn't. He said he wasn't really a socialist, but his ideas didn't really change all that much. He just said the left became more dogmatic, and he felt he needed to stand up to that. Max Eastman. What made him do it? Well, a lot of the horrors coming out of the Soviet Union that a lot of the left refused to acknowledge, not just the communist left, but even a lot of the liberal left that just didn't want to deal with it until the Khrushchev report came out and said, yeah, Stalin's purges killed more than Hitler did in his death camps, right?
Well, those circumstances make sense, right?
Yeah,
Especially with soldiers that go off to wars, you see this violence,
right.
and you come home, and maybe you have a family. You don't want your child to go experience what
Sure.
you went through,
Yeah,
so it would track that you would switch your
right.
stance on that.
Right, or you see a whole country against you, and you're wondering why are these people trying to kill me? I want them to be free, right? And you start to think about why. Yeah, why are okay? It's one thing the soldiers, but why are the people shooting at me, right?
Or why are we here? I mean, you take Iraq, for
Exactly.
example.
Yeah,
Why are we here?
right.
And then you come home and you feel that it was all for nothing.
Yeah, although it's not all at once. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched Born on the Fourth of July about Ron Kovic. Excellent movie. Tom Cruise plays him. Doesn't look anything like the real Ron Kovic, but it's a real guy who became paraplegic because of the war. Went in completely right wing, gung ho. America, love it or leave it. He says that through the first half of the movie, including when his brother becomes a protester against the war. His brother and sister, and even when he gets back for the longest time, he's like, hardcore. It's his former high school girlfriend, played by Kira Sedgwick, who starts to get him to loosen up, and then he starts to kind of think about things. And at the end, and this is real life, he was protesting outside the Republican convention in 1972, and by 1976, he wheeled himself in to make a speech just before Carter made his primary victory speech at the Democratic convention. Excellent movie, one of Oliver Stone's best, I think. And I'm fascinated by it because I'm like, well, what's taking him so long? And you see, there's keys if you know the history. He's got the book Johnny Got His Gun on the shelves. Johnny Got His Gun is an anti-war book that comes from decades before. It's horrible thing to read. Really well done, but I don't recommend it if you're like trying to enjoy a vacation or
I'll have to
something.
check it out.
Yeah, it's just
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with, but it's and All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930 movie. Great movie. Just that talks about how it's a story of the war from a German soldier's point of view, and how he turned against the war, went gung ho, but that happened during the war, and finds out when you start to have ambivalent feelings, it's one thing to have it after a war, but it's kind of deadly during the war.